oh, I did alpha to selection, which selects her. I want to invert that, so I'm going to do that one more time. Alpha to selection, it selected her. I'm going to invert that to select the area around her. Right click, select menu, grow, 3 pixels, and then delete. All right, so now she's a little bit cleaner. Turn my background back on. I'm going to use my move tool now, which looks like a compass rose, I guess. I'm going to hit the M key to select it, or you can select it from the dialog. I'm going to move her kind of to the position that I want. Now you'll notice she's a giant compared to some of these other people. So I'm going to use the scale tool to scale her down. So I select the scale tool, make sure that the layer that I want to select it, I'm going to scale it down. I'm going to hit this link here so that my ratio stays the same, stays constant. That way she doesn't get all distorted. And I'm going to look at their faces, and they look like they're about the same size there. Scale. M for move again, and I'll move her down so that she's kind of standing where she needs to be walking the stroller. Okay, so now what I need to do, well, the first thing I need to do actually is I need to make a new layer out of that. You'll notice that after I use that transformation tool, I have a floating layer. We're not going to get too much into that. All you really need to know is right-click on that layer and hit New Layer. So there she is in her own layer all by herself, all scaled down and ready to go. She's ready to take care of that child. I need to make sure that she's actually behind the wall and, of course, behind the stroller, because it won't do us any good if she's in front of it. So what you might be tempted to do is to switch to the background and turn her off, and using your magic wand tool, you might be tempted to select the portions that you want her to be in front of, and then switch back to her layer and delete those portions. Now, what's dangerous about this, of course, is that you're destroying that part of the image. GIMP gives us something that makes it a little bit safer for us to do that, and it's called a layer mask. This is kind of an advanced technique, but we'll go over it anyways because I think it's important for you to get used to using it. I'm going to right-click on that layer, and I'm going to select Add Layer Mask. Layer mask is similar to the selection in that every pixel gets 8 bits to determine whether or not it should be shown according to the mask. So 8 bits, it's just grayscale. So I'm going to leave the layer mask set to white, which means everything's turned on. And you can see over here on the side, there's this white box where the girl is, which means everything that's white and an image there will be shown. If I switch to black pen and I have Edit Layer Mask turned on, and I start drawing on that layer, what you'll see is that it doesn't draw black, it actually erases. And if I change it to white and I start drawing, it brings it back. And if I pick something in between, like a nice gray, it'll make it transparent. So that's what the layer mask does for us. And what it lets me do here is it lets me take portions out of this layer so that they're no longer visible without actually deleting the data from the image. Which is kind of nice, because later on I might modify this image and I want to move it down further away from the child, and if I've deleted that section, maybe I don't have the original ugly sweaters image anymore. And this is all I have to work with. So I'm going to make this layer transparent. I'm going to modify the opacity. I'm going to tune it down a little bit just so I can kind of see behind it. I'm going to start selecting, I'm going to switch to the background layer as the active layer. And I'm going to start selecting that baby carriage because I want her to be behind it. So I'm going to mask where the carriage is. I'm going to zoom in here and pan. I'm going to try to go kind of fast here. Normally, if this was your photos of your loved ones, you would probably be a little bit more tedious. But for the purposes of this demonstration, we don't really care that much, so I'm going to be over here and a little bit careless. Okay, so I've got portions of that fence selected and the baby carriage. I'll do a little bit more here. And I'm going to zoom out. And of course, I don't want her legs either, so I'm going to. But I don't need to use the rectangle tool, or I'm going to use the rectangle tool because it's faster. So R to select the rectangle tool, and then Shift to add to the selection. I'm going to take her legs out from her entirely. I'm going to zoom in, draw another rectangle, holding the Shift key to get more of her, whoops, and holding Shift again. Currently I changed my tool. R for rectangle, holding Shift again, selecting some more. And I want that little square there too. Okay, so now I'm going to switch back to my ugly sweater lady, and I'm going to make sure that Edit Layer Mask is turned on. I'm going to switch to a black pen, or actually a black bucket. And instead of saying fill similar colors, I'm going to change this to fill whole selection. So it's going to fill everything that I have selected on the layer mask with black, which of course makes that transparent. So there she is now, select all, standing behind the baby carriage. Obviously this photo has been gimped. Right there. You can tell because the edges are hard. So something that I might do to soften it up, I'm going to select that layer, and I'm going to go to the filters menu, and I'm going to select blur, just to kind of soften the edges a little bit. There's also a blur tool if you prefer to do it by hand, and maybe we'll do that just so you can kind of see the effect. This is the blur tool here. It looks like a drop. And I'm going to zoom in, and I'm going to select all, and I'm going to, well, I don't know how well you can see that. She's already kind of heavily pixelated. Not important. There she is, pushing her shoulder. So we have removed a person from this image, and we have added somebody else in their place. Any questions? I know it doesn't look very good, but we did it kind of fast. All right, if there are no questions, let's move on. The next example that I want to show you is something that I think is kind of neat. It's called the perspective tool. And this is useful for modifying how something appears to the viewer. So I'm going to open an image called, in the examples folder called, what's it called?
Different perspectives.
No, Philips LCD. So this is a television. You can tell that it's kind of a slanted view of it. It's a perspective view. The right edge of the television is further away from the camera than the left edge. So if I want to take an image and I want to make it appear as if it's on that television, I need to modify the perspective of that image as well. So let's open as layers another image. For this one, we're going to use, what do we got? Jump. Let's use this jump image. Now what you'll notice is that this image is taller than it is wide, and the image of our television is wider than it is tall. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to crop this layer so that it's the same ratio as the television. Now, this being a television, widescreen format television, I can probably guess that the aspect ratio is 16:9. So I'm going to apply that same aspect ratio to my jump image. Fire up a calculator here. I'm going to hit layer and layer boundary size. So this is going to allow me to crop that layer to a specific size. Its width is 453. I want to preserve that. I just want to crop the height. So I'm going to take 453. I'm going to divide it by 16 and multiply it by 9 so that it gets the same ratio as the television. And I get 255. So I'm going to change just the height to 255. And then I'm going to make sure that the interesting portion of this image is going to be the result. So there we go. Now I have a layer. It's been modified so that its aspect ratio matches that of the television. If it doesn't quite fit, that's okay. We're going to make it fit using the perspective tool. Whenever I use the perspective tool, the first thing that I always do is I turn down the opacity, because when you actually start using the tool, it turns it back up. Actually, I'll just show you. If I don't turn it down, it leaves both images there. So my old image and my new image are both kind of in the way. So I'm going to turn the opacity down just so that it's out of the way. And now I'm going to start using the perspective tool so that only the resulting image is visible. And all I'm doing is clicking and dragging so that the corners are in place with the corners of the bezel. Try to make them match as closely as possible without being too picky. And hit transform. And I'm going to turn the opacity back up, and there we go, we're on television.
Yay!
So that's the perspective tool. It can be really handy for things like this if you wanted like an image of a movie cover or a book or something like that, or if you wanted to transplant an image onto a computer screen to make it look like you're doing something cooler than you are. A similar tool is the perspective clone tool. So we've seen the perspective tool and we've seen the clone tool. Let's see what the perspective clone tool does for us. I'm going to close this image. And now I'm going to open that different perspectives image. Now, before this throws you off, realize that this is just an image of a girl in a pool and it's rotated. So there's no witchcraft going on. But what you also might notice about this girl is that she's probably depressed because she's alone. And we don't want anybody to be depressed, so we're going to give her some friends. Of course, friends are people that share interests in you, so these friends will enjoy laying in a pool with their legs outside of it. So I'm going to grab the perspective clone tool there, and I'm going to make sure that modify perspective is turned on. So this is the first thing that you need to do when using this tool, is you need to actually set up the perspective. So I'm going to pick some distinguishable points, such as this swim lane, where it intersects with the edge of the image on this side, and where it approximately intersects with the image on that side. And also where the pool edge is on both sides. So now I've set my perspective. And I can change this now to perspective clone. So much like the perspective tool, what I'm going to do is I'm going to first hold Control to select my target area, and I'm going to click somewhere else where I want to drop it. So the first thing I'm going to do, I'm going to zoom in. And I want to make sure that when I clone her, that the people are sitting on the edge of the pool as well. So I'm going to be very careful about where I select my clone point. I'm going to pick right where her hand meets the edge of the pool side. So I've selected that, and I'm going to move down a ways down the pool, down here, and I'm going to make sure that the new place that I select is going to match. So I'm going to click right there. I'm holding down the mouse button, and I'm going to paint the rest of the girl in. I'm going to do that again, but I'm going to zoom out just so that you can kind of see it. I may not be as accurate, but hopefully it still turns out okay. So what you'll notice is that the girl that I have just cloned is smaller than the original, which makes sense because she's further away, and that's how perspection works. I can clone some more friends for her. We can make this a party actually, just by clicking in another area and popping her down. Now the reason why I had to be careful about where I selected my target points is because you'll notice that that doesn't line up anymore. And that can either be because I wasn't careful enough about where I put it down, or also because my perspective is not set up correctly. So obviously when you're doing it, you want to be careful about how you set it up and where you click, but that's probably good enough for now. One of the other things that you probably notice is that it's doing everything. If I only wanted to clone the girl and not the water, what might I do?
You select just her.
Right. So that is the perspective clone tool. And let's give her one more friend. Right here near the front.
Wait, how would you do that though? Because if you have her selected, then if you're not trying to modify her.
Well, the way that I would do it is I would select her using the tools that I know how to use. And then I would, let's just say, and then I selected the areas around her. I hit Control-I to invert that selection. So let's pretend that I have her selected, and I'm going to kind of fake it just to make it quick. So let's say I have her selected. I'm going to copy her, and I'm going to paste her. And you notice so I Control-C to copy, Control-V to paste. I now have a floating selection. I'm going to right-click on that and click New Layer. So now I have a layer that's just her. And for the sake of this demonstration, pretend that it truly is just her, not an oval around her. Now what I can do is I can clone just her onto this layer instead of the other portions. And the whole time, of course, I'm leaving my original layer alone, so that I'll always have that original image to come back to. Yeah?
So would you still be setting up your perspective on the first layer?
Yes.
Cloning out the second?
Yeah.